Welcome to the first Source event, the Yes Special, with your host, Denny Somach. Over the next 3 hours, you'll hear from members of the group, past and present, the people that helped them perform their show, some friends who recall memorable events, and of course, a lot of great music.
This is the Yes Special, and for the next 3 hours, we'll take you on an in-depth look at one of rock's premier groups, through all the changes, right up to the recording of their latest album, Drama. Many of the interviews on this Yes Special were conducted while the band was at Townhouse Studios in London, working on that new LP. You'll find out what they're up to and where they're headed in the 80s. We begin with background material and profiles on founding members John Anderson and Chris Squire. For that, here's Source rock reporter Bill Fantini.
Rock plus art equals yes. A simple equation. And after 12 years, 11 albums, and countless sold-out concerts around the world, it still holds. It is the stuff of rock and roll legend. In 1968, when a self-taught bassist named Chris Squire met former farmhand and truck driver John Anderson at London's La Chasse Club, where Anderson was sweeping floors for rent money, they had no idea they'd soon form one of rock's most innovative and popular groups. That first night, they discussed their mutual love for the music of Simon and Garfunkel. By the next night, they'd already written their first song together. The story of Yes has always been the story of talented, ambitious young rockers hitting it off and rising to every challenge together. Chris Squire, John Anderson, Bill Bruford, Peter Banks, Tony Kaye, Steve Howe, Rick Wakeman, Alan White, and Patrick Moraz created an amazing orchestral sound with just the simple instruments of rock and roll: guitars, drums, keyboards, and vocals. Along with the work of Genesis, King Crimson, and Emerson, Lake and Palmer, Yes would set the standard for all art rock to come on classic LPs like the Yes album, Fragile and Close to the Edge. John Anderson, born October 25, 1944 in Lancashire, left school at age 15 to work first on a local farm and then as a truck driver delivering bricks. He first became interested in pop music through the Beatles. He even played with a band called the Warriors at the notorious Cavern Club, scene of the Beatles' early triumphs. He also spent 6 months with a band in Germany before meeting Chris Squire. He once said, "I wanted Yes to be just like the Nice, with Vanilla Fudge harmonies." And then, with albums like Fragile and Close to the Edge, John started plowing new lyrical ground. After 12 years with Yes, John Anderson has left to pursue new frontiers. Chris Squire, nicknamed The Fish because he's a Pisces, born in London March 4th, 1948, taught himself music during his school days in Middlesex. Purchasing his first bass for only 30 pounds, he learned a lot about the bass guitar from listening to Bill Wyman on Rolling Stones records. He enjoyed a time of experimentation in London bands The Sin and Mabel Greer's Toy Shop before starting Yes with Anderson. Squire has been described by associates as a super perfectionist and a little over-technical and pre-arranged. These qualities do show up not only in his bass playing, songwriting, and arranging on Yes albums, but on his self-produced solo record, Fish Out of Water. It was Chris who made the phone call to Rick Wakeman in 1971, inviting him to join, and it was usually Chris who would stay at the studio for post-production and mixing sessions long after the other members had gone home. And it was Chris Squire who helped formulate the fusion of powerful instrumental backing and strong vocal harmonies, the Yes sound heard round the world.
With the addition of Trevor Horn and Jeff Downes in May of 1980, Yes have undertaken a new challenge, but that remains consistent with their long history. The group's first challenge may have been its toughest. Shortly after they started rehearsing in a dingy Soho cellar, Yes were called in as last-minute subs for Sly and the Family Stone at a London nightclub. It was their first real gig. With rave reviews, they gained a spot on Cream's farewell concert and a recording contract. In 1969, they issued their first album, and it was clear that they were a band to watch. Ahmet Ertegun, chairman of Atlantic Records, told The Source how he first heard about the group and why he signed them.
Robert Stigler mentioned that he heard a group that he thought was quite interesting called Yes, and then later told me that he thought they were pretty good, but he wasn't going to sign them up. So we set up an audition, and I was quite impressed by not only by how they performed, but by their interest in the music and their great intensity with which they performed the material that they played for us.
That first album, simply titled Yes, was made up of 8 songs, 6 of them originals, written mainly by Chris and John, and 2 covers, one a Lennon and McCartney tune. The Beatles had quite an influence on both of them. John Anderson.
Well, the Beatles initially got a lot of people out of the kind of possible mundane situation to get into going seeing bands, being in bands, and going seeing groups and being in groups. And it was like that revolution that they were always hinting at was happening, and they were the actual pushers of that. And they were front runners along with a lot of other fine musicians of the time, you know, the Beach Boys and Stones, Zappa, all pushing. But the Beatles were like a strong pinnacle for millions of people.
Chris Squire.
They were my awakening interest in rock anyway. The 50s era never had much of an impression on me, although I quite like some old rock and roll Elvis things now. At that particular time, it kind of seemed very flippant to me, the whole rock idea. And it was the Beatles that really awakened an interest, as it did for so many people.
Yes always took things one step further, especially when they did outside material. Dan Hedges, author of the forthcoming official Yes biography.
Because Yes weren't a copy band. I mean, their versions of the song bore little or no resemblance to the originals. I mean, their version of Every Little Thing, you know, they were sort of light years removed from the originals.
Every Little Thing from Yes's first album. Upon the release of that LP, the group tried to obtain some recognition. Chris Squire.
Yeah, I remember those days quite well. We had a different manager then. Yeah, we did all the regular kind of things. Played, the clubs and toured around England in the van and did all that stuff.
Production director Michael Tate, who's been with the band since the beginning, recalls one of the early tours.
We were, I think, 5th or 6th on the bill for a tour, and in Newcastle, the headliners were The Who and the Small Faces were second on the bill, Arthur Brown, the Mindbenders, and that was real small-time stuff, but it was fun.
By the second album, Time and a Word, Yes began to develop what would become their unique approach to music. John Anderson explains.
I'd started listening to a lot of classical music, starting with the Planets, Dvorak, Tchaikovsky, generally centering around that area. It was exciting. I felt very strong about orchestration at that time and wondered if we could ever, as a group, get that together on stage, especially to be able to go on stage and sound like an orchestra would be incredible. So we had a lot of talks about this, and after a while we decided that the Time and a Word album, we would try and feature the kind of strings and horns and brass and so on.
1971 was an important year for Yes. Steve Howe replaced Peter Banks on guitar. They toured America for the first time, and the Yes album was released. I've Seen All Good People from the Yes album of 1971. This was Steve Howe's first recorded appearance with Yes. A closer look at Steve coming up.
The Yes.
Steve Howe joined Yes officially for the Yes album. But as Yes fans know, his picture appeared by accident on the cover of Time and a Word. John Anderson recalls seeing Steve for the first time.
I remember the first time I saw Steve Howe was down in this club in London called the Speakeasy, very famous club. And I walked into this club and wandered through to the stage area and stood underneath this kind of guitar maniac. And there's about 3 people in the audience, and he was hitting every note available on the guitar. It was incredible to watch his fingers moving at an incredible pace. I couldn't believe him. And I couldn't believe the whole night. It was one of those nights. That was the first time I ever saw Steve. Then we just met 6 months later, and then I remembered these fingers.
For a profile on Steve Howe, here's Bill Fantini.
Steve Howe never took a music lesson in his life. He once admitted as much to a London reporter, adding, "I just got a guitar and plonked away on it for a few years." In the 10 years he's been plonking away with Yes, 33-year-old London-born Steve Howe has not only set new standards for progressive rock guitarists to follow, but his 6-string explorations have opened up new vistas in sound for Yes on such milestone LPs as Fragile, Close to the Edge, and Going for the One. Howe's bottomless well of talent was unknown to most Yes fans when he was announced as Peter Banks' replacement in 1970. His previous employers had been mainly London-based pop groups like The In Crowd, Bodast, and the fashionably psychedelic Tomorrow, who enjoyed a minor mid-60s hit with My White Bicycle. Hal joined Yes in time to contribute a section of Starship Trooper as well as his whimsical guitar number The Clap to the Yes album. Later, he would co-write the concept and words for Topographic Oceans with John Anderson. But Steve Howe's bigger contribution over 9 Yes albums and 2 solo outings entitled Beginnings and the Steve Howe album has been to round up jazz, country, R&B, and down and dirty rock and roll into a fluid, expressive playing style. And it comes through. For 3 years running, the prestigious Guitar Player magazine has named Steve Howe the best overall guitar player.
Howe's joining the band had a large impact on the group's style, as Atlantic Records chairman Ahmet Ertegun explains.
I think that there was a significant change in their conception of their music, which occurred, I guess, at the first album that we really felt that on was the Yes album. We really had pay dirt, so to speak, and they really found their style.
Starship Trooper from the Yes album, the one that provided them the opportunity of coming to America for the first time. That's up next when the Yes Special continues.
Backstage and the fun of America and this whole amazing thing where you can get eggs in every restaurant anytime you want. You know, it was just amazing things were happening. Hotels with 2 double beds. I mean, all this was amazing after staying in little boarding houses for 12 and sixpence, which was like $1.50 in England, is what we used to do when we were on the road. America was the big time.
On that tour, the band did only a handful of interviews. Philadelphia radio personality Ed Shockey conducted one of those interviews, and he provides an excerpt exclusively for the Yes Special. Here he tells how that conversation came about.
I had been a Yes freak from the very beginning, the first album. I think it must have been Every Little Thing and the very pop stuff on the first couple of albums that really intrigued me a lot. And the third album had just been released, the Yes album. And I got a call from the Atlantic promotion man here in Philadelphia who knew I was a Yes freak. He said, Yes are going to be at the airport in half an hour and you want to go meet them. And I said, great, let's go. So they were like amazed that anyone came to the airport to meet them. This was evidently very early in the tour, and no one had ever come to the airport and said, I'm in radio and I really love your stuff. And I said, come to the radio station now, we'll do an interview. And so we did. And I got John Anderson, Steve Howe, Bill Bruford. And it sounded like this. John and Bill are from the beginning of the group, right? I guess, John, you're sort of like the leader. Are you
well, there was
step right up to the microphone.
me and Chris, the bass player, we sort of formed the band late in '69. Bill was with us then, and we were like a 3-piece. And then we got Tony Kaye, the organist, about 6 months later, and we finally arrived with Steve Howe about a year ago.
Right. There was another guitarist on your first record, right?
That's Peter Banks.
Right.
Peter was a very good guitarist, but we couldn't, we seemed to lose contact with him musically, and so we decided to get a new guitarist in. And we were very lucky to find Mr. Steve Howe.
Yours is No Disgrace on the Yes Special. The group toured America a second time in late 1971. They played clubs in major cities and opened for acts like the Jay Giles Band 10 years after and others. Rock critic Lester Bangs saw them when they played on one of the early tours.
The first time I saw Yes was when they were as a support act for Black Sabbath. And it was so slick, and the audience just went wild at Cobo Hall in Detroit. And then Black Sabbath came out after Yes had 3 encores or something, and played a typical sludgy Black Sabbath set and did not get an encore. And it was obvious, who was on the way up.
The Fish from Fragile, the album that placed Yes in the category of supergroup. In the next hour of the Yes Special, we'll take a look at that period, some personnel changes, and the band live.
The Yes Special, with your host, Denny Somach, will return from the source. Welcome to Hour 2 of the Yes Special from the source. Once again, your host, Denny Somach.
Fragile helped establish Yes as a supergroup. It is still one of Chris Squire's favorite albums.
I always used to think Fragile was my favorite album, but actually there's pieces on all of the albums that are high spots for me. There's low spots as well. But as an overall album, I think Fragile possibly is one of the things I like the most.
It definitely made the band more accessible. Biographer Dan Hedges.
Fragile is the one, of course, that actually got them on the radio. Fragile, of course, had Roundabout, but it did get a lot of airplay on stations that basically had already written Yes off as being too progressive, and it brought a lot of people to the concerts who normally wouldn't have come to a Yes concert. That was the catalyst. Fragile went up into the top 5 of the American charts. From that point onwards, Yes were basically a supergroup.
This is the Yes Special, and that's Roundabout from the Fragile album. Rick Wakeman joined on this LP, and it contains some of the band's best material. For a profile on Wakeman, here's Bill Fantini.
Of Yes's 12 years together, extraordinary organist Rick Wakeman has been with the band for only 6 of them, recently quitting to go solo again after a second 3-year hitch. But during his Yes years, the gold-capped crusader became a popular rock and roll figure based on incredible musical talent, razor-sharp wit, and general flamboyance. Born in London, May 18, 1949, he was a genuine piano prodigy who started lessons at age 6 but was dismissed from the Royal College of Music because he kept missing lectures to do session work. By the time he joined the Straubs in 1970, Rick had played on David Bowie, Cat Stevens, and T-Rex records and would eventually appear on 600 singles and 400 albums. He came to the attention of Yes when Chris Squire saw Wakeman's round, boyish face on the cover of Melody Maker, and Rick subsequently joined in 1971. A genuine raver, his drinking habits often clashed with the band's quiet, vegetarian lifestyle, and Wakeman quit Yes in '74 on his 25th birthday. A dyed-in-the-wool workaholic, he dived headfirst into grand concept solo projects and even mounted a musical pageant on ice to dramatize his Myths and Legends of King Arthur album, paying for his success with a minor heart attack in '74. In the peak of health, he rejoined Yes 2 years later and celebrated their 10th anniversary with them. But Rick has since moved back to his country mansion and his collections of keyboards and cars, started his own record label, Moon Records, and formed the Rick Wakeman Band.
Less than a year after Fragile was released, Close to the Edge appeared. The audience had also developed where they would accept long pieces of music. And You and I on the Yes Special. Coming up, Bill Bruford departs and Topographic creates waves.
The Yes Special, with your host Denny Somach, will return from the source.
Completing Close to the Edge, drummer Bill Bruford departed Yes for King Crimson. He has since played with Genesis, troubadour Roy Harper, French eccentrics Gong, National Health, and UK. Why had Bruford joined Crimson and gone on to become rock's hottest pinch hitter?
Since I left Yes, I spent nearly 3 years with Robert Fripp in King Crimson. That group stopped when he reached the age of 30 because he warned everybody, all and sundry, that he was in fact going to take a sabbatical year. So I knew when I entered the group that the group would have a finite life. Musicians developing need to meet other musicians in order that you have some idea of what kind of a person you are. It is through working with other musicians that you get some idea of your own personality, your own characteristics, what you want to play, what you're good at, what you're bad at.
Alan White was asked to join Yes upon Bruford's departure. He knew it was an exciting opportunity. Alan recalls.
Well, I had to rise to the occasion. I'm a different kind of drummer. I come from a different angle. I came from more of the underneath and gave a little bit of a soul to the band, as well as being technically within the band, you know.
For a profile on Alan White, here's Bill Fantini.
Alan White was not the first name that came to anyone's mind when Yes was considering a replacement for Bill Bruford in late '72. Born June 14, 1949 in Pelton, County Durham, Alan White had been playing drums for 10 of his 23 years with groups worlds away from the flawless techno-rock of Yes. In addition to extensive session work, Alan had joined the Beatles camp as occasional drummer with John Lennon's Plastic Ono Band and a studio player on some of George Harrison's solo albums. He also did some recording and touring with Gary Wright, Donovan, Joe Cocker, and Rick Wakeman. In short, he was a much funkier, straightforward drummer than Bill Bruford. It was appropriate that Alan made his Yes debut on the triple live album Yes Songs, pushing that hard-driving funk up front even on a long, involved work like Close to the Edge. He would later indulge his taste for hot rock and R&B rhythms on his 1976 solo album Ramshackled. Alan White may be one of the youngest Yes men, but he's always had experience and talent on his side. The 1-2 punch Yes was looking for in 1972.
White's first appearance with Yes was on the highly successful live album Yes Songs. Yes's audience had become so big mainly through their live appearances that this 3-record set became the group's biggest seller up to that time. Live performances are considered by the band to be essential to improving the music and giving it full expression. Atlantic Records chairman Ahmet Ertegun describes their music best.
The way I think of them is though they create a kind of a moving sound painting more than just playing a tune. It's an abstract feel that they get, especially in personal appearances, where they are actually creating rather than reproducing.
Yes also put a lot into their concerts technically. as Frank Barcelona, head of Premier Talent, the group's booking agency, told us.
They spend a great deal of money, and always have, on their presentation. And I don't mean by that the smoke bombs and the dried ice and that. I'm talking about the technical presentation, the sound and the lights. They spend an incredible amount of money trying to get that sound that sounds most near to the record.
Siberian Katroo from Yes Songs on the Yes Special. In the summer of 1973, Yes began work on Tales of Topographic Oceans. For a review, we go to source reporter Steve Sutton.
In 1972, Yes recorded Close to the Edge. In 74, they went over the edge with an ambitious two-record set called Tales of Topographic Oceans that became their most important album to date for a couple of reasons. It was the first Yes LP to be scorched by the critics. But more importantly, Rick Wakeman would cite it as one of the reasons for his discontent when he quit the band later that year. Conceived and written by John Anderson and Steve Howe, Topographic Oceans was Yes at their most pretentious, daring to spread a single concept based on Indian Shastric scriptures over 4 sides of rock and roll vinyl. There were no medleys to whistle while you worked, and the lyrics verged on cosmic jive. It was no wonder the general verdict on Topographic Oceans was that it was all art and no rock. Yet in retrospect, Yes should be commended for even attempting to do a record as demanding as this. According to Eddie Offord in a 1973 Melody Maker story, most of the complex harmonic and rhythmic backing tracks were recorded live in the studio, and in a 1975 interview, Steve Howe insisted with good reason that there wasn't much difference between a classic rocker like Long Tall Sally and the segment of Tales called What Happened to This Song. Like the 4 Yes albums before it, Tales from Topographic Oceans went gold, suggesting maybe Yes fans weren't nearly as baffled as the critics were.
Steve Howe, looking back on the album,
it was indulgent in the sense that we drew on melodies and reused them, revamped them. But this shows in the group a desire not to put in so many ideas and then use little of them. You know, we were trying to expand ideas.
And what are Chris Squire's thoughts?
I think the concept of doing a double album with the Meisterwork 4-side thing was a very good idea. And I did put a lot of energy into it and got into the thing very strongly. But it just was too early to do that kind of a thing at that time, especially with a bit of a weak concept. You know, it didn't have enough substance. However, you'll still find plenty of magic moments on it.
A look at the film Yes Songs and Rick Wakeman's first departure. Next.
The Yes Special from The Source.
By the end of 1974, Rick Wakeman had left Yes to be replaced by Swiss-born Patrick Moraz. Moraz was playing in Refugee, a trio formed by British musicians Lee Jackson and Brian Davison, along the lines of The Nice, their old band with Keith Emerson. Dan Hedges remembers that period.
Rick was obviously on the way out, and Yes were, I think, aware of the fact that he was going to leave. And so when Rick finally did leave, it came as no big surprise to anybody. What they did was they started holding rehearsals outside of London at a place called The Barn. Basically, I mean, Yes knew a few people, and Brian Lane knew a few people who also knew Patrick Moraz. And so Brian Lane turned up on the end of Patrick Moraz's telephone line, asked him if he wanted to come down. So Patrick showed up and auditioned and played with him for a while. Took some tapes home, listened to them, and within a couple of days he was a member of Yes.
When Patrick Moraz became the new Yes member, he made the following statement.
I hope the people will dig that I'm in Yes now, and I'll really give my maximum for Yes's music and for Yes's fans, and I'm sure a lot of people will, I hope a lot of people will understand it that way, that I'm contributing to the band and to the expression of the band in the most depth I can offer.
Sound Chaser from Relayer on the Yes Special. In 1975, an 80-minute concert film entitled Yes Songs was released. It had been shot prior to Wakeman's departure and became one of the largest grossing films of its kind. One of the highlights in Yes's career was a concert they headlined at John F. Kennedy Stadium in Philadelphia during the bicentennial year. Over 100,000 people showed up for this extravaganza, which also included Peter Frampton. That day is remembered for different reasons by different people. Promoter Larry Maggot.
That whole day climaxed with an incredible performance. It was just a great way to end the evening and to welcome the summer of 1976, which is the bicentennial summer.
Agent Frank Barcelona.
That's probably been the most successful outdoor package in the history of the music business. We did the date down in Philadelphia and a number of other dates, and they were all incredibly successful.
Production director Michael Tate.
Putting on a Yes show outdoors is a monumental problem. For a start, we always wanted to play in the evening so we could use the stage lights and effects. And by then I had the laser, dry ice, you've got wind to contend with, you've got to think about the wind, you've got a backdrop to put down, again you've got to think about the wind, you've got other acts on the bill, you've got to think about equipment. Usually on a Yes tour we have so much stuff around, there's no room for much of a support act, but we were co-headlining with Peter Frampton, and then we didn't envisage, 120,000 people. We had a fireworks display which the cues got mixed up. The dry ice blew away, the drape was just about to rip the roof down with the wind and everything. Apart from that, everything went rather smoothly.
Coming up in hour 3 of the Yes Special, Going for the One, Tormato, and you'll meet the new guys, Trevor and Jeff.
Welcome to hour 3 of the Yes Special from The Source. Once again, your host, Denny Somach.
It would be more than 2 years before Yes would release another group record. All the members released solo albums, but none would attain any kind of success near what a Yes album had. There are many reasons for this, but Yes manager Brian Lane summed it up best.
If you take Yes equaling a figure of 5, then each of the individuals doesn't equal 1. I think, that their musical contributions are appreciated more as members of Yes than as individuals. The reason for the solo albums not doing so well was that more people respect Yes the total entity than any of the individuals in it. I think your guitar freaks would buy a Steve Howe album, or the aficionados of bass would want to hear a Chris Squire album. But I think more people would be interested in hearing what Chris Squire could do with Steve Howe, as opposed to Steve Howe playing bass. Although he's a great bass player, Chris Squire's a better one.
Going for the One, released in the summer of 1977, marked the return of Rick Wakeman to the Yes fold.
I went back in November of 76. I officially rejoined the band on Thanksgiving Day. We kept it quiet for a long time because we didn't want lots and lots of people talking and publicity and things. We wanted the Going for the One album to come out and do the talking for us.
For a review of Going for the One, here is Source reporter Randy Kotz.
Released in July 1977, Going for the One signaled a new beginning for Yes after the turbulence of Rick Wakeman's exit and Patrick Moraz's entrance in 1974, the various solo albums, and the mixed reviews that greeted Relayer. With the return of Wakeman in late 76, Yes overhauled everything but their basic sound on Going for the One. After 6 successive Roger Dean cover designs, they turned to noted English album art specialists Hypnosis for the new album cover. The album was also the group's first entirely self-produced LP, and was the first Yes studio record since Fragile to feature a song under 8 minutes long. And with the highly extroverted Wakeman back at Keyboard Central, Yes tried the very thing nobody felt they could do anymore. On the opening title song, they lashed out with some good old rock and roll, sparked by Steve Howe's hot riffing on steel guitar. At the other end of the album, a 15-minute suite called Awaken, featuring Wakeman at a genuine church organ, recorded in a Swiss cathedral and piped into the band's Montreux studios via Ma Bell. In between, Yes worked their own special magic with classical cool and rock and roll nerve on such pop gems as Wondrous Stories and the tenderly lyrical Turn of the Century. With punk rockers yapping at their heels and critics calling them down for the count, Yes came back stronger than ever with this album. They were going for the big one, and they got it.
Going for the One, the title song from that album on the Yes Special. Chris Squire has some thoughts on that particular LP.
Going for the One could have been a much greater album than it actually was, especially in the States. We had a hit in England with a kind of a tailor-made chart hit, even though we didn't approach it like that.
Rick Wakeman felt his influence on the album was minimal.
When I went over to do Going for the One, the majority of the material had already been written. So it was just a matter of rearranging it and for me to put my 2 halberth in. I really had no part in much of the writing, with the exception of the bits in Awaken and a few little odd bits here and there.
The band toured and the new material was well received by fans and critics alike. Going for the One seemed to bring a renewed interest in Yes. Biographer Dan Hedges.
It was an attempt to be more concise. No 6-day solos, no grandiose arrangements, no tracks that took up a whole side of an album. They were short tracks, they were to-the-point tracks. One of the stories, of course, was actually a hit single in England, which surprised everybody, including the band. And Going for the One, the album, went to #1 in the English charts. It brought a lot of people back to Yes, I think, who had left Yes.
In 1978, Yes released Tormato. This album, like the one before it, was self-produced. Rick Wakeman contributed more writing to this LP than any previous Yes album. He told us the reason.
The Yes is a funny band. We're all very sort of honest with ourselves, and we literally pick the best pieces of music. So, I mean, all the time people are offering things and throwing things, and it's the best that goes on. And we don't really care who writes it, because it's the overall what happens to it at the end that really matters. And that's why we've always worked, which is why I've never really written that much before.
Future Times and Rejoice from Tormato on the Yes Special. Coming up, an inside look at Yes's unique round stage setup.
The Yes Special from The Source.
Yes toured America in 1979, even though they had no new album release. They had, however, perfected their round stage setup, which is now an integral part of their live show. Production director Michael Tate told us it really came about quite accidentally.
What happened, I was sitting in the studio and we're saying, what are we going to do? I'm talking to Chris Squire and Steve. And Chris said, I don't know, let's play in the middle. And I thought, play in the middle? He was only joking, you see. And I thought, that's not a bad idea. I wonder how that can be done. I went back to the Yes workshops in London, and I had cut out models that we'd had from the year before. We built everything in model first, and I played with them till I got everything to work. And what I did there was borrow the setup they had in the studio. For the first time, eye contact with the band could be very close. The only real change was Wakeman had moved from stage left across to in front of where John used to be on a straight stage and put John in the centre. And it worked very well.
What does Rick recall about it?
It's funny, it reminds me of my early days when I used to play in ballrooms, because all the stages in ballrooms are in the round. And it's really funny, the first night I thought, my God, it's like being back at the top-ranked ballroom again. Yeah, I enjoy it very much. It took 3 or 4 days to get used to the sound on stage. So it's totally different, as you can imagine. So you've got nothing for it to bounce off. You can't buzz off with the PA because it's all around you. And it's strange sometimes you look down and the person who was sitting down in the front row isn't there anymore. You know, they're around the other side. And that's strange. That throws you throughout the first 4 gigs. That really does throw you. You just never know where you are.
Don't Kill the Whale, recorded live on the Yes Special. Their tour of 19 John Anderson and Rick Wakeman. Rick had an interesting comment about the Yes audience on that final tour.
Yes concerts are something unique in as much as you've got to like Yes music to queue up to come to a concert. You don't get very many kids who come, well, I think I'll go on the off chance. Because it's not that sort of music that you can go on the off chance to listen to. You've got to love it to come. We were talking about how young the audiences were getting, and somebody made the not very astute comment that maybe it was us that were getting substantially older. But it's great when you meet people that you met, say, 7 or 8 years ago, you know, that come along and say, oh, this is our 6-7-year-old kid. And they brought it on to concerts. Like a new generation of kids come to concerts wearing their Yes t-shirts. It's good. You know, some of them are old enough to be our children. Some of them most probably are.
Personnel changes haven't affected Yes in the past, and it doesn't seem likely to in the future. The band's booking agency president, Frank Barcelona.
It's the overall sound. There isn't one dominating figure in Yes. That's why, personnel changes, where they would be detrimental in most acts, and really don't affect the act terribly much, because it's the sound, and it's an overall sound.
In the latter part of 1979, Yes went to Paris to begin work on a new studio album. Producer Roy Thomas Baker, best known for his work with Queen and the Cars, was producing those Paris sessions when differences in the musical direction that the band should take began to develop. And on the eve of their 12th anniversary, Yes has undergone another major overhaul. Wakeman is out, co-founder John Anderson is out, and 2 electronic popsters named Jeff Downes and Trevor Horn are in. Reaction was mixed at first. New York radio personality Scott Muni, who's known Wakeman for a long time, gave us this statement.
Wakeman has been on his own before and has been somewhat successful for a musician who has left a group. And He's highly regarded, as all the musicians are, and yes.
Another radio personality who's known the band since they first came to America, Ed Shockey.
In this case, I always thought it was the music that kept them together. They had, I've been with them when they had little squabbles, personal squabbles, and so on. But they seemed to, in spite of all that, and when lesser people might have broken up for personal reasons, the music held them together. In this case, I've finally been convinced that it was the music that caused the split up.
Next on the Yes Special, Trevor and Jeff join Chris, Alan, and Steve. And you'll hear something from the new album.
The Yes Special.
You may remember Horn and Downs as the Buggles. With their 1979 international smash, Video Killed the Radio Star. Downs is from Manchester, Horn from Leicester. And they met in London 3 years ago after doing sessions and playing in various local bands. As the Buggles, they planned to make what Horn called electronic pop for the 80s. Manager Brian Lane told The Source how he became involved in Horn and Downs becoming Yes members.
I started managing Trevor and Jeff earlier on this year, just after they had success with Video Killed the Radio Star, which was a massive worldwide hit. When I heard their album, which I just put together, it really intrigued me. I hadn't been exposed to techno rock quite that severely, and they went under the name of the Buggles because they explained to me they wanted to put together a concept album on what they thought a plastic rock band would sound like. So they tried to find the stupidest name they could find, and they came up with the name the Buggles. Unfortunately, they put together a concept album that became a hit worldwide before they established their own identity. And suddenly the concept became them. They were going to put a band together and go on the road to prove that they were capable of being potentially the new Supertramp, 10cc, or even Yes. They explained to me that Yes had always been their heroes. And so I introduced them to Chris Squire, and they started writing songs with him. And John Anderson was pursuing solo things with Vangelis, and Rick was getting certain plans together of his in Switzerland. Next thing I knew, I called down to the studio, and they said, "Listen to this, Brian." And they played me this track that they'd been rehearsing, which Trevor and Jeff had written, and it blew me away. It reminded me of, filled me with the same kind of excitement as the first time I heard Yes 11 years ago when I started to manage them. It was almost like a rebirth of the same band.
Chris Squire comments.
They had written a song that they thought would be good for Yes, and that's really interesting because, the last 8 years, very few people have ever come along, and I'll probably be inundated now, but have actually come along and said, "Oh, I've written this song, I think it'd be really good for you to do." And I thought that kind of attitude was really a brave one, and also I listened to their first album that they had out, and was actually rather, amazed by some of the techniques, some of the sounds they were getting into, and some of the ways of approaching things, and I noticed it quite obscurely, I should think, to a lot of people initially, but there was quite a large connection between the way they were working and the way that Yes worked.
Trevor Horn.
In a way, there's a similarity between what we were trying to do with the Buggles and what Yes trying to do, although the two are miles apart. I mean, if you think about it, with the Buggles we were trying to make pitches in the music. I mean, the music wasn't sort of political or anything like that. It had pitches in it. And we tried to put them there, but in some ways we took a lot of easy routes with the Buggles, a lot of little gimmicks and things like this. Well, Yes try and do the same thing, but they try and do it in songs that are 10 minutes long, and they try and do it with using instruments and music, and it's very much harder. And in some ways, if you think about it, to go from a pop band like the Buggles, going to Yes is like a complete extreme.
On the new album Drama, there's a song called Run to the Light. Trevor Horn and Jeff Downs say it's a rather interesting song.
There's a very bizarre track I think will surprise quite a few people, which is called Run to the Light, which Chris plays piano on and I play bass on, which is just a very bizarre track. Mm-hmm. I think people will be surprised. That's quite short. That one actually sounds a bit like, it reminds me of the Beatles' Magical Mystery Tour in a couple of places.
Yeah, it is sort of reminiscent early 70s type.
Yeah.
Run to the Light, from the new Yes album Drama. What's the rest of the album like? Trevor Horn.
I think in some ways that the music's a little bit closer to the Yes of the Yes album and closer to the edge, in as much as it's a little bit more direct, a little bit heavier, and a little bit less
fiddly and jangly. I just there's a sort of way of summing it up.
Jeff Downs.
They have a term in America called the wimp factor, and we've basically been trying to knock out the wimp factor, so that the music is very heavy, you know, and I think that will surprise a lot of people. It will adapt itself well to stage.
What do Alan, Steve, and Chris think of the new members and the effect it'll have on the future for Yes? Alan White.
The old Yes, I saw us maybe happening for another 3-4 years at the outside. Now, I don't see any horizon for the band because the new enthusiasm has just built up my confidence in the band so much that I'd say at least 10 15 years before I ever dream of not playing Yes music.
Steve Howe.
The combination of us should be able to, in 5 years, create a new Yes drive and fulfill the desire for people to see us worldwide. And I think that in itself will bring us back really to where we were, say, in 74, when we seemed to have everything going for us right.
Chris Squire.
Yeah, I've never been a visionary in terms of ever wanting to think too far ahead about certain things. I just generally work on feel and a bit of planning. But yeah, we should do this tour of the States when we're going to return and do some shows in Europe and England. England being another part of Europe. Then I think we'll go straight back in the studio around January and February and work on the next album.
If it's hard to imagine two new wave hitmakers joining an established band like Yes, think again. A new decade calls for new music, and what other rock group can step outside its own tradition, experiment with rhythms, lyrics, technology, and still have it come out sounding like rock and roll? The answer is still Yes. Tempus Fugit from Drama, the new Yes album. Thank you for being with us on this Yes Special. I'm Denny Somach, and I'll be back for the next Source event.
The Yes Special was written by Denny Somach with contributions from Dave Frick. Additional dialogue provided by Bill Fantini, Jeff Gelb, Toby Goldstein, Richard Skinner, and Dan Fermento. Special thanks to the following people for their assistance in preparing this special: Ahmed Erdogan, Frank Barcelona, Brian Lane, Harvey Goldsmith, Larry Magid, Derek Green, Elliot Hoffman, Scott Muni, Lester Bangs, Chris Welch, Michael Tate, Jim Halley, Nunu, Claude, Hugh Padgham, George Chambers, Nikki Squire, Dan Hedges, and Harriet Sinton. Research consultant Ed Shockey. Technical consultant R.D. Steele. The associate producer Sean McKay. Program consultant John McGann. I'm Gary Bridges, and the Yes Special was produced by Denny Somach for The Source.